Different from structural functionalists, sociologists within this wide tradition would argue that the social world cannot be studied in the same way as the physical world, because people engage in a conscious activity, attach meaning to their actions, and thus sociologists should be concerned less with explaining behavior and more with how people come to interpret the world in the ways that they do. In terms of health and illness, this interpretive approach focuses upon the symbolic meaning of what it means to be ill in our society. So there are two distinct perspectives that stand out that we will examine: symbolic interactionism and social constructionism. We will, in this second part of the lecture, understand these approaches in relation to health and illness. Symbolic interactionists developed in reaction to structural functionalism and sought to explain social life as arising from the interaction of agents making independent interpretations of a situation. Therefore, symbolic interactionists, have given individual perception and agency a more important role. This approach focused on the specific meaning and causes people attribute to illness. Symbolic interactionists do not deny the existence of social structures, but argue that people construct and reproduce them. Social interaction is then crucial because it forms human conduct instead of being merely a ways to express or release it. Interaction relies on spoken and unspoken shared language, symbols, and meaning. Hence, interaction occurs within social, cultural, and historical contexts that shape it but do not determine it. This theory asserts that the social identities we possess are influenced by the reactions of others. So if we demonstrate some abnormal behavior, it is likely that the particular label will be attached to us. This can bring about important changes in our self-identity. A disease diagnosis will be an example of such a label. For example, we could think about what would happen to someone once they're diagnosed with clinical depression. What type of social stigma would they suffer from? An example of the work that symbolic interactionists will focus on would be that of medicalization. Medicalization changes human behavior to sick behavior and is the process of understanding this transformation. An example of medicalization is illustrated by how our society views alcohol and alcoholism in the historical long term. During the 19th century, people who drank too much were considered bad, lazy people. They were called drunkards, and it was not uncommon for them to be arrested and run out of towns. They were not treated in a sympathetic way because at that time it was considered that it was basically their own fault for not being able to stop drinking. During the latter half of the 20th century, people who drank too much were increasingly defined as alcoholics. People with a disease or a genetic predisposition to addiction who were not responsible for their own drinking. With alcoholism defined as a disease and not a personal choice, alcoholics came to be viewed with more compassion and understanding. Thus, badness was transformed into a sickness. While interactionism does acknowledge the subjective nature of diagnosis, it is important to remember who benefits when a behavior becomes defined as an illness. Pharmaceutical companies make billions treating illnesses such as fatigue, insomnia, and hyperactivity that may not actually be illnesses in need of treatment, but instead become opportunities for companies to make money. The social constructionist approach is actually very important to looking at the interpretive understanding of health and illness. A social constructionist approach holds that knowledge or practice that is normal and taken for granted can be understood as a result of a particular power relations pertaining in a particular historical or social context. Within this perspective, we will see and examine the contributions of feminist theory, particularly of the French philosopher Michel Foucault. The deconstruction of truths of sociology has really been taken up by feminist scholars who have analyzed the binary divisions between male and female, masculine and feminine, as a powerful social construction that defines women very much apart from men. Due to years of struggle, consequences of women's movement, women's studies, the study of gender has been incorporated into sociology. Feminist theory explores the gendered nature of the definition of illness and treatment of patients. Its main concern is the ways in which medical treatment involves male control over women's bodies. Feminist theory in medical sociology also has post-structuralist roots, specifically in regard to the social constructionist view of the female body. Feminist theory in sociology argues that gender is a social construction and that one is socialized into womanhood instead of being born as such. Thus, social and cultural cues, values, norms, and ways of behaving are integral to understanding how gender is socially constructed. In medical sociology, feminist theory has paid attention to how social and cultural perceptions shape our understandings of body, illness, and disease. For example, historically, less socially desirable physical and emotional traits were assigned to women. An example of this is hysteria, which was in the 20th century constructed as a woman's disease associated with their biology and femininity and generally seen as a sign of weakness. Other issues that feminists have taken up in terms of medical sociology have been how the healthcare system is gendered, the incorporation of women in the healthcare profession, the medicalization of childbirth, among others. Feminist theories and their approaches in medical sociology have drawn on post-structuralism to critique the medical regulation of women's bodies, emotions, and disease, and to show how this control has systematically served male interests and patriarchy in general. This deconstruction effort that occurs is also called sometimes post-structuralism, which concentrates on dominant medical discourse, which has constructed definitions of normality and deviance, and refuses to draw a distinction between scientific and social knowledge. In terms of health and illness, this Foucauldian approach to constructionism draws attention to the ways in which we experience ourselves in our bodies, not in some naturalistic way, but in a symbolically mediated fashion. The body becomes really as a field of discourse, and I want to explain this a little further. Foucault and others who followed after him have sought to explicate the social construction of bodies with an approach that emphasizes the role of power and knowledge in shaping the body's evaluation. They argued that scientific medicine is like any other knowledge system, in that it is seen as an ideologically inflected product of society in which it arises, and as such has not an inherent merit over and above all any other knowledge. Medicine, thus, is not only about medicine, as is conventionally understood, but also about the wider structures of power and control. Foucault is a leading thinker of post-structuralism, and he has contributed to medical sociology in major ways, namely through his analysis of the social functions of the medical profession, including the use of medical knowledge as a means of social control and regulation. And he has also studied madness, clinics, and sexuality. He argues that secular medical discourse replaced religious one and became a new form of social control which managed bodies both individually and collectively. He found two distinct trends emerging in the history of medical practice: the medicine of the species, which is the classification, diagnosis, and treatment of disease, and on the other hand, the medicine of social spaces, which is the prevention of disease. The former defined the human body as an object of study subject to medical intervention, while the latter made public health subject to medical and civil regulation. The surveillance of human sexuality by the state, church, and other institutions became really important sectors and sections for Foucault to study. Thus, concern with the body, knowledge, and discourse have also been integral components of Foucauldian and feminist intervention in medical sociology. So in this unit, we have examined 5 key critical perspectives on the relationship between people's experiences of illness and their place in the wider social structure. Ever since Parsons' time, sociologists have sought to understand the regulation of health and illness in terms not only of the individual but also of a wider social order. While theoretical ideas have undergone changes, the interests of medical sociology continue to lie in theory, policy, practice, and lived experience. So with this said, I wrap up this lecture, and I will see you next time.